Welcome to Mighty Married Moms. Join us at our kitchen table twice a week as the Mighty Married Moms, Debbie, Linda, Wendy, invite spectacular guests to weigh in on staying sexy, vibrant, and healthy, building marriages with soul-satisfying connection, raising happy, healthy, successful kids. Conversations with Mighty Married Moms will bring you closer to the life you really want. Episode 8. Hey everyone, welcome back to Mighty Married Moms. Today we are really excited to be able to introduce you to Pam Ressler, who is the founder of Stress Resources in Concord, Massachusetts, the firm that specializes in building resilience for individuals and organizations through tools of connection, communication, and compassion. Pam's research on the intersection of social media, resilience, and healthcare has led to her being a frequent speaker to local, national, and international audiences. And she is working on her first book called Cultivating Resilience, which will be published this year. And I, for one, can't wait to read it because it's definitely a topic of interest to me as a parent coach. Pam, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here with you three ladies and welcome any questions you have about Stress Resources and the work that I do.
Great. Well, why don't you just give us a real quick synopsis of how you got to where you are right now? We'd love to hear about that.
Well, the short version I'll go with. I've been a nurse for actually well over 3 decades now, and my work has transitioned through the years, as I hope most of your work has too. Where we were when we were 22 is certainly different than perhaps where we are now as we go through life changes, etc. But I've worked with populations anywhere from pediatrics to geriatrics. And one of the commonalities that I find is we're really lacking, most of us, in strategies for being the most resilient when we meet with adversity in our lives, whether that's in the business environment or parenting or marriage or our health concerns. One of the things that our culture does not necessarily help us with are the strategies for resilience. So about 15 years ago now, I started my firm called Stress Resources. And I work with individuals, organizations, on building tools of resilience. And I work with a wide group of ages. I work with parents, some kids, a lot of folks with chronic illness, how they live better with using tools of resilience. And now, because a lot of the work of resilience is very based on mindfulness, which I've been trained in, I'm working a lot with businesses and organizations on workplace environments and how do we build mindfulness into our culture of creating resilience. So that's kind of a snapshot of what I do.
That's fantastic. I mean, really amazing to think about the fact that there's so many places and areas of our lives where we can learn to be resilient. And I think the key for me as somebody who's just been starting to do some reading about resilience is it needs to be almost an intentional act.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about resilience itself, where it comes from, how we cultivate it, especially how can we encourage our kids to become resilient?
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing because isn't that what we as parents want the most, is for our kids to be able to meet with adversity but be able to bounce back. And if I had one definition of resilience, it would be the ability to bend and the ability to bounce back from challenges and life challenges. And especially as parents, we would love to wrap our kids in bubble wrap and keep them safe and protected. But life is not always that way. And so I think that we really need to enable our kids and ourselves in these tools and strategies. Not that we necessarily know where that adversity or challenge will come in some part of our life, but to be able to have those tools in place that can be can be inserted and also used at different times to help us with the ability to bounce back, because we can't really control the external. And so what resilience really means is shifting the sense of control to the internal. And that's what research around this concept of, it's sometimes called stress hardiness or resilience, really evolves with these characteristics that we can support. Everyone isn't born with the same amount, but it can be trained and skill-based. We can build upon the strengths that and the commonalities that all of us have who are more stress-hardy individuals.
So how do parents help their kids with that then?
So I think the first thing is parents need to role model. And so we start with the parents before the kids. Okay. Because if this is just something that you're throwing at the kids for another thing to protect them or keep them safe, I think you've really missed the concept. Because as parents, we need to role model what resilience looks like. And then we can encourage our children really in the 4 C's, I call them, of resilience. Suzanne Tabasa, 25, 30 years ago, studied key characteristics of specifically adults, but we can translate this into kids too, of stress-hardy individuals, people who seem to be able to get knocked down and get back up in adversity. And she identified 3 characteristics. I'm going to add a 4th one here. Okay. But her 3 that she identified were a sense of control. And control did not mean external control, but really engaging in the internal control. When I translate that into working with kids or parents, oftentimes that looks like, can I take a breath in this situation, and manipulating perhaps a relaxation breath. We're not changing that kid has a math exam second period. What we're changing is a sense of control within the situation at hand. So a sense of control, Suzanne Tabasa felt was essential. And that sometimes is a reframing of where we initially see control in being. The second thing that seems to be really important in those people who are able to withstand a lot of adversity seems to be a sense of commitment. So they are putting themselves in there. They're in the game. Even if things are very tough. They also tend to gather a team around them or partners. So this sense of we're in this together commitment seems to also follow through in those people who tend to be more resilient. The third thing she identified was a sense of challenge. And this, I think, is one of the most important things that we as parents can instill in our kids, because in many of the Asian languages, we talk about the sense of crisis meaning 2 things. One is the identification of danger, and the other is an opportunity. And that's what she was really talking about in seeing challenge. So we acknowledge that this is scary, that something could be dangerous, but we also acknowledge, is there some kind of opening, opportunity, learning that we may open ourselves to? So this directly relates to this kind of always on stress response, or the hyperactive sympathetic nervous system that we see in our culture, because we have such a high level of stress and fear that we are overusing this. So that sense of challenge is saying, absolutely, this is scary, here's some danger, this could be really bad. Right. But is there something that we can take from this? So those are the 3 things that she identified. My 4th thing that also relates a lot to my research and why social media kind of connects here is a sense of connection. And as we are in stressful situations as a society, as individuals, in schools, in workplace environments, we are bombarded with this sense of we need to be safe, we need to kind of wrap ourselves, as I said, in bubble wrap. And so we tend to isolate ourselves. And the isolation takes away all the good we're doing with those other three things. So connection and finding places to connect with something more than yourself is essential and seems to follow through in those people who have met with incredible obstacles, incredible adversity, seem to find a way to be more resilient. So it's control, commitment, challenge, and the fourth is, from my words, connection.
Yeah, yeah. That's really interesting. We were just having a conversation with somebody earlier about Dr. Corey Allen, about what it means in a marriage to, instead of always be looking for how can it be safe, wonderful, romantic, and lovely all the time, rather what are the challenges that I'm meeting in this relationship? And instead of blaming and saying, I should have no challenges, you need to snap out of it or be better so that I can have a more comfortable life, he flipped that, that concept around and said, the core of marriage, in his words, is that it grows us up and helps us. And what I'm hearing you say, it's a similar concept of I'm becoming more resilient as a woman, as a person in the world, through my relationship with my husband, through the challenges of marriage, through the challenges of everyday living, whereas that romantic notion that we've all been around. So it's an interesting concept that's more broadly applied here.
Yeah, we can really apply it to the culture in general and all of the interactions we have. Yeah, I think it's really important to step away from the idea that I will be happy when, or things will be better when, because as we also talk about mindfulness, that puts everything away from the current awareness of this moment, and this is all we have. So when we talk about control, it really is shifting to that internal, what can I control, instead of hoping that by my actions I will affect happiness. And so in a way, it feels a little like, why would I want to spend all my time working on this when I'm really interested in the outcomes? Well, what we find is when people start to shift away from attachment to the only way I will be happy is X, Y, or Z, the experience starts to shift. The experience starts to shift, and that is huge. And I think for parents, and as we try to launch our kids into being productive, healthy members of society, those are skills that are as important as teaching them how to cross the street safely, or how to do the laundry, or any of those things. I think that often we attach, my kids will be happy when they have these skills, and we never think about these internal skills that we can also teach and foster by our role modeling.
That's great.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I was thinking also about, you talk a lot in your work on your website about mindfulness, and which encompasses all these things. And I often talk to my clients about mindfulness in eating, right? Don't gobble down your food. Nobody chews their food. You're sort of not really thinking about, I'm in a hurry, so I'm going to go grab a bagel instead of what would be healthy for my body, thinking about where the food came from, this sort of whole mindfulness. So can you talk about mindfulness?
Absolutely. Mindfulness is such a wonderful concept that, of course, is thousands of years old and based in many of the Eastern traditions, and somehow has gotten a huge spotlight probably in the last 2 years. A lot of that is being driven by neuroscience, and what we now know about the ability to drop into the moment has so many wonderful benefits to us. As a quick aside here, and then I'll answer your question, Linda, we see sports teams now embracing mindfulness. So the Seattle Seahawks actually have a mindfulness teacher and have for the past year.
Really?
And even though we're not too interested in them winning the big game, I do have to give them credit for embracing this concept as part of actually being more effective and in the moment. So the eating piece of mindfulness is huge because generally when we're eating, the eating part of it is the least interesting part. It's a social time, or we use eating as a way to keep from being too bored or to be doing other things at the same time. And so there have been several studies and actually work around this idea of mindful eating, promoting weight loss, promoting a lot of a sense of calm within very crazy times. So there's also something called an eating meditation that can be done in 5 minutes or less that I love to do with kids too. And it's equally as effective with adults. So this concept of mindfulness really means not taking everything out of your mind, but helping your mind shift into actually noticing what's happening in this moment, not the moment that just happened, or not projecting into the to-do list, the what's next. Mm-hmm. So with kids around mindful eating, what I do is I ask them to find one snack item that they want to eat. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that healthy snack item that mom wants them to eat. It can be anything, because what you want to do is to get them engaged in the activity. So forget about the box of raisins that, a lot of us healthy mindfulness people do. Let them pick what they want to eat, but it has to be one thing. Then ask them to pretend they're an alien creature that has just landed on the planet Earth. Mm-hmm. Their mothership has told them that this object that they have is edible for their species, but they've never seen it before. And then you set a little timer for 5 minutes. And for 60 seconds, they need to explore this object just with their eyes. And the next 60 seconds, they need to explore it with their fingers. So touch it. The next 60 seconds, you want them to smell it for a whole 60 seconds. And then you want them to listen to it for a whole 60 seconds. The final 60 seconds, they can finally taste it.
Wow.
And that is an incredible way. And with adults, it works great too. I do it in a lot of my classes with adults. That 5 minutes is going to seem like the longest 5 minutes in your life, because you can't have your cell phone and you can't be texting. You can't be writing down what you're experiencing. You got to be experiencing it.
That goes right into that marshmallow study.
It's very much like the marshmallow and Can You Not Eat It, except what you're doing is you're not making them wait. They're actually experiencing, but just not in the taste.
Right. So the process is completely different, but it seems to me like the outcome could be the same.
It is.
Because they looked at just for our listeners and viewers who are not familiar with it, the marshmallow study was they put like 6-year-olds or 8-year-olds into a room, and they would put them with a cookie, and they would say, if you can wait, what was it, 15 minutes or something like that?
It was a long time. It was a long time.
If you can wait for 15 minutes and not eat this cookie, then we'll give you another cookie, so you'll get a second one if you can wait for 15 minutes. And they looked at these kids, and I forget what the percentages were. I actually have the book at home called The Marshmallow Test now, and I'm working my way through it, but I forget what the percentages are. But they did a longitudinal study, and the kids who were able to wait did so much better in their lives later on. They had higher grades. They were more successful in their jobs. They were happier in their families. They were healthier. Yes. I mean, so it
has to do with the sense of control. And what you're doing with the mindfulness eating is you're actually bringing yourself into this moment, even though ruminating or projecting may be more fun.
Yeah.
You're training your brain to pay attention right now. And that's hard. And think of ourselves. I mean, most of the time we're off to the races, you know, either in one direction. Very little of our time is spent in the present moment. I use the analogy of it really is like a car engine. And we're not turning the engine off when we drop into the present moment. We're allowing it to go into idle so we can shift more effectively into forward and reverse. And, you know, if you never stop in idle, you're going to lose your transmission a lot faster than those who can. And so that's why this work is being really embraced in the business community, certainly in sports and in education. And we do not train people to actually be present just for a little time. You don't need to, you know, go off to an ashram and be meditating for weeks on end in silence. These little pieces build the ability to be more resilient because we are training ourselves to actually internally control instead of putting it out there.
Well, I would love to see a longitudinal study on the kids that you do this with over time to see
it would be a really interesting thing.
Have any effect on their lives later on.
And it's so interesting. It's the 5-minute opportunity, and it's the 5 senses. How easy to remember it.
Yes,
right.
So it's such a wonderful tool that I can build into my life today. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, and again, it's not just for kids; it's for us.
Absolutely.
I mean, how many times do you actually? And it doesn't have to be, you know, a piece of food. It could be a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. How often do you actually disengage from all of those things that we seem to think we have to keep us occupied, and truly notice, what does that coffee smell like? What does it sound like when I swallow? Or what does it sound like when I pour into the cup? All of these things that are right there, but we're not noticing.
And for me, what I'm hearing is that it's not about how fascinating to learn what a cup of coffee sounds like being poured, but it's more of giving your mind and your heart the ability to be fully present in that moment. That's the vehicle by which it's not like we need to write a report on what coffee sounds like going into a mug. It's just that practice of being totally present.
Can you explain to us? I have two-part question. One is, what does mindfulness do to us in our brains as well as in our bodies? How does that help us? And then secondly, also, if you could compare mindfulness to meditation, that would be great.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think there's a third component there, relaxation, that we hear people talking about relaxation a lot too. Yep. Mindfulness simply means, the definition is dropping into the present moment and noticing it with awareness. What has now become kind of hybridized with the term mindfulness is its connection to meditative techniques. And meditation, in its simplest form, is actually coming into the present moment with focus. And there are many types of meditation, some that have repetitive words or phrases. Most organized religions have some kind of repetitive prayer pattern or ritual. And what happens to the brain during that time is it basically comes away, as I was talking about before with that metaphor of the car, drops us into the present moment, and the thinking brain comes into what we are experiencing right now. Mindfulness can have some formal practices, like when you hear about people doing sittings, etc. And it also can have those informal practices, like what we talked about with the mindful eating, the 5-minute thing. Relaxation is what happens when we allow ourselves to step away from the overactive sympathetic nervous system, the thing that drives our fight or flight response. Wow. And that's an immediate thing. So we can teach somebody to do some relaxation breaths. What we now know is happening with the meditative brain is actually very different from the relaxation brain. So the reason we know this now has to do with functional MRIs and neuroscience. We knew this anecdotally for decades, but we never actually had the scientific validation of what was happening in the brain. So what we see on a functional MRI is somebody can drop very quickly into their brain looking relaxed, which actually has some decreased activity in certain areas. But as they continue with that focus, and it looks like we need about 15 minutes to 20 minutes of sustained focus, not like we can do with aerobics where we can have 5 minutes here and 10 minutes here and add it up. Sustained focus. A shift happens, and we can watch this happen on a functional MRI, to an area of activation. And the area of the brain that seems to be activated is the same area that's very associated with feelings of optimism, feelings of positive thoughts in our body. And it's the same area that's activated with many of the newer antidepressant medications.
Really?
And so this is what happens, we know, with meditation. So we need these larger chunks, even though these smaller pieces are adding to the ability to relax and tone down our overactive sympathetic nervous system and increase our parasympathetic, which is the inverse here. So that's how they all kind of meld together. So it's really exciting that we now have some interesting evidence that no, meditation cannot be, a 1-minute meditator that you can do in a New York minute. That's relaxation. But that relaxation adds to these incredible benefits. And what we find is that there may be some structural changes that happen with meditation also.
The brain?
And these are really small studies right now. Some of the interesting ones are coming out of Sarah Lazar's lab over at Mass General in Boston. But what she is noting in, again, very small, non-generalizable studies at this point, are even with as little as 8 weeks of practice. And what she was using in her experiments was something that we call MBSR, or mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is a mindfulness meditation training. What she was seeing were 2 areas actually had some structural changes, not just activity changes. And those 2 areas were the amygdala, which area of the brain that's very associated with our fear sensor and our fight or flight response. That area seemed to be smaller in mindfulness meditators.
Really?
And so that wasn't being triggered as intensively. The other area that seemed to be getting larger was the area called the hippocampus, which is the area that is learning and memory. And so when you talk to people who engage in mindfulness meditation, other forms, often they'll say their creativity or their ability to problem solve is heightened, even though that sounds so counterintuitive to be pulling back to be more productive with these tools of mindfulness. So that may have some explanation that this learning and memory place is larger.
Well, and what it seemed to me, I've been learning a lot about the subconscious mind, and by pulling back and allowing it to do its thing, instead of constantly bombarding the subconscious mind with new stimuli, that's how creativity is born, I would think.
Exactly. And so often, again, getting back to what can parents do for their kids, we are not giving them these tools. We are actually telling them the exact opposite.
Yes.
We are telling them the exact opposite of what this work is. So this should be taught in kindergarten. This should be taught in preschool. Because by the time they're in high school, the patterns are already so in place that this seems so counterintuitive. It's a very hard sell.
Yeah. Right. It's sort of like a grasping mentality, like whatever I need to calm down or whatever I need is out there. that
right.
loaf of bread, that friendship, that relationship, that marijuana, whatever it is outside of me. I can't access it internally.
Well, again, it's seeking the external control versus trusting in the body and mind's ability to work with the situation, even though it may not be the outcome we are seeking immediately. And that's really, really difficult to tell someone. But we know with health outcomes, I mean, this work and the whole work of resilience has been incorporated or starting to be incorporated into many programs that have increased health outcomes. Dean Ornish's cardiac program was based on a huge component, not just of diet, but of meditation techniques. When we're looking at chronic pain patients, which is one of my specialties, ironically, this work is actually more effective many times than pharmaceuticals.
I believe it.
Totally. And it changes how we perceive the physical sensation of pain. And so, we are a society that's looking for a quick fix to our happiness or to positive outcomes. And so it's a very difficult cultural shift about this in a different
I was just going to mention the cultural piece, and we need to wind up here, but the one piece that recurs to me is in my faith tradition, I've heard it said that people in the United States say, please God, take away this adversity, fill in the blank. And people in other cultures say, please God, give me a strong enough back to withstand the adversity. And that's the shift that I'm hearing you say. There's some wisdom in that other way of doing it. And we have capacity within us to face adversity that we're not tapping into.
Well, and we're not giving ourselves permission to gain those skills. Because, we do have the ability to seek external ways of working with. And not to say that also doesn't help, but if we look at the research surrounding the work around resilience and stress hardiness, we don't look at those external. Those were not factors that played into these folks in being resilient.
Right. Oh my gosh, this is great.
We could talk to you all day.
I feel like there's still so many things we haven't even touched on yet, but we do need to stop here because our listeners are driving to work, and they're probably sitting in the driveway right now saying, okay, I need to go in.
Get in. But I want to listen to her longer.
I know. Thank you, Pam. This was fantastic. We really appreciate spending some time with us, and clearly we're going to need to have another conversation in the future. Because
you'll have to come back.
Yeah. This is wonderful. And
I would love to. It was a pleasure, and thank you for including me in your app today.
Before you go, can you tell us what projects that you're undertaking, anything, and where our folks can find you?
Oh, absolutely. Well, my website is stressresources.com, and on that site you'll find kind of an overview of a lot of the work that I do, from social media to mindfulness training to corporate work, as well as some sessions in my office here in Concord, and I also do virtual sessions with folks around the country and the world. I also have a blog that is Pam Ressler. .blogspot.com that you can find me there, and I do a lot of musings, I would say, on that blog around resilience and mindfulness. And right now, for the rest of the month of January, I'm doing a daily haiku mindfulness challenge. And what has been really fun for me to see is I feel a bit like the Pied Piper. I've kind of started to collect folks from around the country and world who are contributing their haikus, either on Twitter, and some of them post something on my blog too, but they've kind of gone off into their own communities to take this work of just a daily thing. So I invite your listeners and yourselves to contribute. Look at what's on there. I'm also on Twitter, and that's at Pam Ressler. And I also have a Facebook page, which they can find me at Stress Resources.
Well, we'll try to put all of those links onto the website. So
they're all linked together. So if people find one, they will find
the rest.
Okay. Well, thanks for visiting Mighty Married Moms. We're excited that you were here.
Thank you so much, ladies.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Mighty Married Moms. Tune in twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays to meet fascinating and inspiring guests who will help you create the life you've always wanted.
You can find these episodes and special gifts just for you at mightymarriedmoms.com, as well as a link to our Facebook community,
where we continue the conversation around the kitchen table. Please also help share the love by leaving a review on iTunes. We'll see you next time.